Hey there, welcome back to the channel. So today I have an idea for a video concept. I've been watching a lot of booktubers read a bunch of other booktubers' favorite books of 2022, and I've been trying to find really creative ways to tackle my own TBR. It's something that has been a struggle lately just because I've been using my library and NetGalley a lot more, so those books become a priority and the books that I actually own just end up sitting there. And I also thought, well, a lot of other booktubers are reading people's favorite books, but is there a book out there that is the worst book among booktubers? So I actually don't really know where this video is going. It's just a concept at this point in time. It's either going to become a video about the worst books read in 2022, according to other booktubers, or it might become a video where I read the worst books according to booktubers if they're on my shelf. Does that make sense? So first and foremost, I have to find out if I even own any of the books that are being mentioned. I have a feeling, and this is not backed up by data, but I have a feeling that a lot of the books that end up on people's worst list end up being a lot of new releases just because of all the hype surrounding them. And a lot of the books that I currently own are not new releases for the most part. So we'll see how it plays out. So first and foremost, there's a lot of videos that I need to watch. I'm thinking about a sample size of about 30 different booktubers, and I really want to capture a wide range of them, from really popular ones to some that just started, to fantasy readers, literary fiction readers. That way, I can also make sure that hopefully some of the books mentioned will be on my shelves. So with that, I have a lot of watching to do, and based on the result, we'll see where this video goes. Okay, so I've watched about 13 booktubers' worst or most disappointing books of 2022 so far, and a couple of findings so far. They really vary in the amount of books that they're naming. I was hoping that they would have a top 10 list, and some people do, some people don't. Some people have as little as 5, others have as most as like 15 so far. Another thing that I'm noticing is that I've heard about a lot of these books, but I don't actually really own many of them. And it's so interesting because the book that is currently winning was actually on my worst books of 2021. So I feel validated. So far, based on all the books that people are mentioning, given the 13 booktubers that I've watched, there's only one book that I owned that was mentioned. So maybe we'll increase our sample size to 50 and see how it goes. Really enjoying the range of the reviews. We have people who are just roasting the books that they read, and other people are giving like very critical and thoughtful reasons why the book wasn't for them. I enjoy both types of videos. It's just been really fun to see what ends up on people's lists. So I'm going to continue watching over the next couple of days and check in with you once we have a more solid list. It's snowing out here. It's freezing. It looks beautiful, but it's freezing. But also, it's almost March. Like, what's going on? What the heck? Where did ball go? Where did it go? Where did it go? Hello? It's snowing out here. I'm freezing, but Mia's having fun. Guess it's an indoor day and we're just gonna go and read and, get through that TBR. Okay, I am back. So I ended up watching more than 30 videos. At some point I got to 45 and I just thought, might as well make it 50. So I ended up watching 50 videos of 50 different booktubers whose videos were either worst books that I've read in 2022 or the most disappointing books of 2022. One thing right off the bat that I noticed is that a lot of the booktubers that I specifically watch on a day-to-day basis didn't make a worst books of 2022, so I actually had to look up the tag. And one of the great things about this video is that I found a lot of new booktubers for me to follow. I am bilingual, so I did end up watching videos both in English and in Spanish. And so I am here to talk to you about the results that I've gathered. Out of the 50 videos that I watched, there were a total of 322 books that were mentioned. Out of those 322 books that were mentioned, 15 of them are on my shelves. However, 14 of them were only mentioned once. The only book that I owned that was mentioned twice is To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini, which I've actually been really wanting to read because he's coming out with a new book this year. But it's such a long book, and for the most part, I haven't heard anyone have one nice thing to say about that book. Regardless of that, I think that only 2 people mentioning it is not enough people. So what I'm potentially thinking of doing is doing this again on Instagram, seeing what books people hated over there, and maybe reading any crossovers or books that were mentioned the most between booktubers and bookstagrammers, but we'll see. So out of the 322 books that were also mentioned, I've already read 17 of those books. You know, half of them I agree with. In particular, some standouts for me were Anxious People. I did not like Anxious People at all. It was one of my worst books of either 2020 or 2021. Then we also have Rock, Paper, Scissors, which was a worst book for me back in 2021. I also didn't really like that book, and I felt so validated that it wasn't on just 1 or 2 people's worst books of 2022. It was on several, and we'll go into the top books that were mentioned in a little bit. But then I was really surprised at some of the books that did show up, like Piranesi. Piranesi is one of my favorite books of all time, and it did make it onto this list. We also had The Picture of Dorian Gray, which is a book that I haven't read in a very long time, but it was one of my high school favorites. Maybe it's time for a reread, but I was also very surprised. Another surprise for me was Finley Donovan is Killing It and 7 Days in June. Those are some of my favorite books too, and they ended up on here. So I like the variety that we had in the exploration of these books. So I wanted to go over the top books that were mentioned by the most booktubers. So the worst books read in 2022 according to BookTube. But also, before we get to that, I wanted to touch on the authors that were repeated several times. What this means is that at least 2 of their books were mentioned by 1 or more booktubers. So starting off with V.E. Schwab, both Gallant and The Near Witch were mentioned. The last thing that I read by V.E. Schwab was her Darker Shade of Magic series, and it was one of my introductions to reading more complex fantasy books. At the time, I actually really quite enjoyed it. And then I tried to read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which I DNF'd. I really wasn't enjoying it. And ever since then, I haven't picked up anything else by her. So I haven't read either of those 2 books. Another author that is on this list, which wasn't a surprise to me, although I'm surprised that only 2 of his books ended up on this list, but that is Riley Sager. Both The House Across the Lake and The Last Time I Lied ended up on here. I haven't read House Across the Lake. I did read Last Time I Lied. It was an okay book, you know, it was average. I had a good time reading it. Wasn't anything special. I can't tell you what that book is about. It's gone, like it's out of my mind. It wasn't unique. Another author on here is Ali Hazelwood. Both The Love Hypothesis and Love on the Brain ended up on this list. She's a romance author. Haven't read anything by her. I'm really not inclined to read these books at all. As you know, I'm not much of a romance reader. Yes, I have been dipping my toes into romance, but I want to be strategic about that, and I don't know, neither of these books have stuck out to me. The next author on this list had 3 authors that were mentioned. That is Colleen Hoover. The first book is Verity, then It Ends With Us, and Reminders of Him. Again, Colleen Hoover is not an author that really stands out to me. I know that her books are mismarketed a lot, like they're dark fiction, but they're marketed as romance. Yeah, I mean, I have no reason to want to read her, but I thought that was interesting and not surprising, right, that her books are on this list. They can be very controversial. The next author is Stephen King with Billy Summers, which I haven't read, It, which I did read, and Fairy Tale, haven't read. I don't find it surprising that Stephen King made it on this list. He's a prolific author, and so I'm sure a lot of people try to read his books and either they work for you or they don't. Then tied at the top are Alice Feeney and Brandon Sanderson with 4 books mentioned. So starting off with Alice Feeney, we have Daisy Darker, Sometimes I Lie, Rock, Paper, Scissors, and His and Hers. I've only read Rock, Paper, Scissors, and after reading that, I don't think I ever want to read another Alice Feeney again. Just didn't enjoy that book. I had a bad time. I was traumatized. No thank you. And then there's Brandon Sanderson, who is an author that I actually quite enjoy. So The Way of Kings ended up on here. Haven't read it. Starsight, Cytonic, and Skyward were each individually mentioned by different booktubers. And this is from the Skyward series, which is his, I believe it's a young adult science fiction series. I haven't read that. So far from Sanderson, I've only read all of his Mistborn books, so Mistborn Era 1 and Era 2, and I've also read Warbreaker, which I really much enjoyed. So Brandon Sanderson and Alice Feeney make it to the top for the author that is most mentioned across these 50 booktubers. Now we're going to take a look at the top books that were mentioned, the most hated, the worst books that were read in 2022 according to BookTube. There's actually quite a handful of books that were mentioned at least 3 times. It's about 10 of them, but today I wanted to talk about the top 5 books that were mentioned. So coming in at number 5, we have House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas. Now, personally, I haven't read anything by Sarah J. Maas. I know that she has a popular series, Throne of Glass, and what's that one other one? A Court of Thorns and Roses. There we go. I know those are like 2 really, really popular series. Never really had an interest in reading them. So the booktubers that mention House of Sky and Breath in their worst books of the year is Peruse Project, Abby Salter, Angela from the Literature Science Alliance, Sade Books, and Life as Monet. So my question for all of you is Crescent City worth starting? Because if there was ever a series by Sarah J. Maas that I would read, it would be this one. I would read it. It's the only series by her that's intrigued me, but I don't know if the second book is on here. Is it worth starting? I don't know. At number 4, we have A History of Wild Places. This is by Shia Earnshaw. And this is a book that I have heard about. I believe it was a book of the month pick at some point, and it has a really pretty cover. I've thought about picking it up in the past, but I never really knew what it was about. Some people say it's like magical realism. Others say it's like a thriller, like a mystery thriller. Maybe it's a combination or a blend of both of those. So 5 people did mention it on their worst books of the year. That was Naomi's Library, Jan from Jan Agaton, Books and Lala, A Sunny Book Nook, and Stephanie Bookish. And between the 5 booktubers that I mentioned, I have quite enough in common with each of them that I don't think I'll be picking up A History of Wild Places because it doesn't sound like a book that I will like. Book number 3 makes me so happy because it makes me feel validated. Coming in at number 3 is Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. 6 people, 6, had it on their worst books of the year. So that was Emmy, Books with Emily Fox, Make with Books, Books Like Whoa, Nakia's Hideaway, and Sabine's Book Nook. Yes, y'all just made me feel so validated because I felt like when I read this book, everybody loved Rock, Paper, Scissors, and I just didn't understand what it was about this book that people liked. The writing is not great. Like, it's not bad, but it's not great. And the author just kind of misdirected you and lied to you so that you couldn't guess the twist. And it's like, why? Why is that necessary? So I'm glad it's on here. Now that I look at this, Rock, Paper, Scissors is the only book that I've read in the top 5. The top 2 books on this list are actually tied. Both of these books were mentioned 7 times, so they are tied for 1 and 2. So in no particular order, the next book on this list is The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager, and this was mentioned 7 times. It was mentioned by Jess Owens, Books with Emily Fox, Jan, Nakia's Hideaway, Stephanie Bookish, Ty's Book Corner, and Elias. So I have read books by Riley Sager in the past, and I have enjoyed some of them, but I don't know, recently his books don't really call to me. Although The House Across the Lake is a book that I would pick up. I know some people actually ended up really enjoying this book, so we'll see. Maybe I'll look into it and check it out. But the next book on this list is a book that I have heard about. I've just never read anything by this author, and at this point, I don't want to read anything by them. Nothing that they've come out with has really intrigued me, but that is A Book of Night by Holly Black. And 7 people also listed it in their worst books of the year. That was Thoughts on Tomes, Jess Owens, Peruse Project, Jan, Jessie on YouTube, Nakia's Hideaway, and Tony Morrow. From what I gathered from the people that I watched, is that this book really deviated from the traditional stuff that Holly Black has written. I believe she's a young adult fantasy author, and this was her first adult book, if I'm not mistaken, and it wasn't what people were expecting. I wish I had more thoughts on this book, but I just haven't read from this author, and I don't think I ever will. So Book of Night and The House Across the Lake are the 2 worst books of 2022, according to BookTube. Do you agree with that? Let me know your thoughts on that. I would love to hear what you have to say. Since I have already read Rock, Paper, Scissors, I could potentially read The House Across the Lake and Book of Night, since they're both standalones, and see what I think. Is this something I want to embark on? Should I do it? This was supposed to be a video that helps me figure out what to read on my own TBR, and instead I might end up adding more books to read. So we'll see. Let me know down below, would you like that? Should I read Book of Night and The House Across the Lake, given that I had zero interest to read these books before making this video? In the meantime, I'm going to try to do this video with Bookstagram and also do this with the best books of 2022 here on BookTube to see if I have more success in finding books that are already on my TBR. Like I mentioned, I did find 13 books. I just wish that some of them were mentioned at least 3 times. If you've made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. Leave a bee emoji down below. I have my Be Kind hat here, so I'm just gonna put it on right now.